Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. And I hope that you're all going to tune in your droves very shortly. I can see that we've already got between 15 and 20 people logged on and ready for another Lowestoft history session with Ivan Bunn. He'll be joining us very shortly, and he's got a wonderful presentation tonight entitled Why Build a Harbour at Lowestoft? This really appeals to me because I'm really interested in all of the political machinations that went on, especially the things like the select committees and the votes and the legal bills and royal ascension through the House of Commons and all those things really plays to my curiosity. So I can't wait to see what Ivan makes of it. In the meantime, though, I'm just going to remind you of a few things. Now, the Lowestoft History Sessions is the voice clouds presentations, and it features the local historian and, may I say, living legend, Mr. Ivan Bunn. He has presented many different talks on different subjects, some fascinating ones, and tonight is no exception, and neither will the next one be. Now, this is episode 16 and episode 17, which is in 2 weeks because we're now running on a fortnightly basis. So number 17 will be on the 28th of September, and that will be based on, and bearing in mind that Halloween is coming very shortly, that will be based on the witch finders in Suffolk. And of course, we know a little bit about the supposed witches, the alleged witches that Ivan has mentioned before. And I believe Ivan himself actually sent a petition for some of those alleged witches to be pardoned. But we can ask him a little bit more about that either this week or on the 28th of September, which is episode 17. Hope you'll be joining us then, and I hope you'll enjoy tonight, which I'm sure you will. I'm just going to mention a few things. One is that we are very, very lucky to be funded by People's Health Trust through the Active Communities Programme. Now, the Active Communities Programme is an initiative to engage people in more activity. It's pretty much what it says on the tin. I'm sure you can work that out for yourself. But I did want to just point out that not only is it that, but it's also about making sure communities have a cohesion and that people can engage with not just their existing communities, but also new ones and ones that are slightly further afield through active activities. Unfortunately, during lockdown, a lot of these initiatives had to be thought through again, and one such is our own Rogues Shanty Chorus. Now, we have been meeting every other Tuesday for quite a few years now, and the People's Health Trust have been instrumental in funding that, and we thank them for it. That wasn't possible, obviously, during lockdown, and so far still hasn't been. We're hoping to return to some kind of normality with that as soon as possible. And in the meantime, what we've been doing is we've been live streaming, Stephen and myself, every Tuesday night. So if you're available on a Tuesday night and you want to tune in and watch us, we will be here, right here on Facebook and on YouTube tomorrow night with our, I forget how many sessions it's been, but it's I think we're up to about 30. So as I say, we'll be here tomorrow night, 7:30, the same time as tonight, and we'll be singing sea shanties, giving them a bit of historical context, as well as some other more folky material with a historical aspect. But what more could you want from history than Mr. Ivan Bunn? He'll be here tonight with his talk entitled "Why Build a Harbour at Lowestoft," and it's fascinating. I've seen the presentation, the slideshow, and I can't wait to see it and hear it. We've got two comments to come in. One's from Mr. David Cutting. He says, "I'm ready. I bet you are, sir." And Chris Collins, she says, "Evening all." Well, good evening, Chris. Lovely to know that both of you are joining in, and I'm sure you are ready. We're all ready for Mr. Ivan Bunn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring him in because he's the star of the event. He's the talent. So we welcome Mr. Ivan Bunn. Hello, Ivan. How are you?
Good evening, Stephen. I'm fine, thank you. Good evening, everybody who's out there and watching. Thanks for joining us again. Ready to go.
So far, Ivan, we've had Mr. David Cutting say hello, and Chris Collins, and Linda Boyce says hi, one and all, and we say hi back to her as well.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Sorry you missed the last one. Did you pick up right? Yeah.
Well, I think Chris was expecting us to be live streaming last week because you're right. She missed, I think, the announcement that we're now going fortnightly. So it's a good job she's here with us tonight. And Jackie Draper says, evening all. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm stalling a little bit because I just like to see a nice healthy amount of comments line up in the box. And another one, we couldn't possibly start without Susan Corkmash. She says, hello, everyone. And we say hello back to Susan. So thank you. So far, we've got around 28 to 30 viewers. And as I say, our correspondents or our commentators are David, Chris, Linda, Jackie, and Susan. We love to see some comments come in. And the reason is it just shows us all that you're engaging with us, and that if there's any questions, we may have time at the end of it for a couple of questions, but save it and see how you get on with it. Chris Collins says, hi, Ivan, I'm okay. Got it now. Yep, she's got it. We sure you have. So, Ivan, I just wanted to skip ahead a couple of weeks because we were talking before we went live about your next episode, which will be the 17th episode on the 28th of September. Now, it's the working title of The Witchfinders in Suffolk. Is there just a couple of words you might say about that, just to whet people's appetite?
Yeah, basically, what it will be, it will look at the activities of Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, and his Oppo, John Stern. And I'll be looking in some depth at exactly where they went, what they did, trying to perhaps figure out why they did it, and some of the controversy around them, even when they were active, let alone today. We're following their footsteps and home in on some of the cases to give some idea of the evidence. I use that word very loosely. The evidence that was being presented that meant that quite a number of people, 200 in the end, were actually arrested, but fortunately that many weren't executed. And we'll just look at all the aspects of what they did, and we'll basically, hopefully, walk in their footsteps for an hour or so. And I hope a view of the big picture, as well as the actual incidents. I say in most of my talks that I give, even the longer ones, that the problem is you could just home into, it's like tonight's talk with the Harbour. I could home in on just one bit of the building of the Harbour and expand on that and make that a 45-minute talk. So what I do with most of my talks, to use the an artistic comparison, if you like, it's like painting a picture. Most of the time I have to use broad brush strokes to give the overall picture, but from time to time when it's necessary, I then go in again using the artistic comparison with a finer brush, put in a little bit more detail. So it'll be the same with the Witchfinders, the same with most of my talks. It'll be the broad picture, but at times homing in on details that I think are necessary to illustrate what's going on in the broad picture, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good analogy, actually, about the artistic, the brush strokes and broad, and then more detailed. And I think what you do is, not just do you often have a very relevant and sort of a rich stock of slides to pick from and to show us to really demonstrate what the themes that you're talking about, but you paint a picture with the words anyway, to be honest, Ivan. So it's a perfect analogy. Well, for me anyway. And like you said, you with history, there's always those ripples on the pond, isn't there? It just always opens up and expands and expands, and I guess that's why with the Witchfinders, we're looking at a broader area of Suffolk rather than a more focused area of Lowestoft.
Yeah, and can I just add to that? I'm sure I've said this before. This has been the 17th talk. Nothing in history exists in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're dealing with local history, there are overlaps. So some of the stuff that I've already talked about will overlap into tonight's talk. I can't help it. A perfect example tonight will be, and I shall only cover it in very quickly, but if you remember a few weeks ago, possibly months ago now, I did the making of Alton Broad.
Oh, yeah.
And I homed in on Mutford Lock,
Mm-hmm.
because Mutford Lock was part of the overall plan of building a harbour at Lowestoft. So that will overlap with tonight's talk. But hopefully, the more I do it, and the more people listen to it, they'll hopefully see how everything is meshed together, if you like. And I don't make an apology for it. I can't help the way it is. I heard a wonderful analogy about trying to write or talk about history. If it's good as an expression, I only heard it last night on the radio. Somebody said writing or talking about history is like drinking an ocean and then peeing a cupful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always much more going on under the covers, isn't there? Mm. Well, I'm gonna give you the floor, I think, Ivan, because I've been keeping our good viewers busy for the last 11 minutes, and I'm sure they're eager to find out the answer to your question: why build a harbour at Lowestoft? So it's just going to take me a couple of seconds to strip the relevant items off the screen and get the presentation lined up. And everybody, this is Mr. Ivan Bunn with Why Build a Harbour at Lowestoft.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, hello everybody. Here we go again. It's nice to be back talking to you all, even though I can't see your smiley faces. So I've entitled it Lowestoft's First Harbour, the Whys and the Wherefores. And again, as I just said, this is an overall picture of what happened. And the harbour at Lowestoft, as we'll see, in actual fact, wasn't part of the main plan to start with. And the story doesn't start in Lowestoft. I just put a few statistics up on the screen. This is to illustrate briefly the problem that was being faced in Norwich. In 1814, and there is a reason I've used that year, the population was estimated to be somewhere in the region of 32,320 people. And obviously all these people had to be catered for. And much of the essential commodities were actually imported into Norwich. Norwich was a prosperous city in its own right, but a lot of the stuff to feed and look after such a large population had to be imported. So you can see on my screen there, every year they imported 3,700 tons of flour, 2,500 tons of corn, 79,500 tons of coal, and 12,000 tons of other goods. This is information that's come directly from the people who decided eventually to build the harbour at Lowestoft. And the reason for this is because every one of these single imports had to come by sea. That was the easiest way to transport them, whether it was north from the north for the coals or south from the docks in London. Everything had to come through Yarmouth. There was not a port at Great Yarmouth. There was not a port as such at Norwich. And so if we just pop on to the next slide, please. So here we have a map of this, and this is the reason why the great and the good of Norwich decided that they needed to make a port in Norwich, a port that could handle seagoing ships. The problem was, and you should see from here in a moment, if this slide does the things that I expected to, the red line is the River Yare, taking you to Norwich, and it came through Great Yarmouth. Everything came through Great Yarmouth. Now, there was 3 problems getting goods into Yarmouth. The first problem was the seagoing vessels sometimes couldn't get into Great Yarmouth Haven, the harbour, because they had problem with a sandbar that sometimes formed across the mouth of the haven, and large seagoing vessels couldn't get over the bar and into the port at Great Yarmouth. When they got into Great Yarmouth, because of the shallowness of Breydon Water and the course through Breydon Water, seagoing vessels couldn't get as far as Norwich. So the seagoing vessels had to be unloaded into much smaller boats, keels, as they were called, or wherries. So it had to be offloaded, transferred into a convoy of smaller vessels, which would then sail up to Norwich, where they would be unloaded. This made the importing of goods through Yarmouth expensive. The third problem was theft. Apparently, according to the burghers of Norwich, when coal and flour and other goods were being offloaded from the seagoing vessels to the smaller craft, there was a lot of thieving going on, and they lost 1 year they estimated they lost 4,000 tons of coal at Yarmouth by people nicking it off the boats or stopping halfway along the river and offloading it to their friends in one of the villages. So this is why the burghers of Norwich decided that if they could have a channel that could handle seagoing vessels all the way through to Norwich, and Norwich itself would become a port, then the costs would drop, the thievery would go, and they wouldn't get ships stranded outside the harbour at Great Yarmouth. So if we go to the next slide, so that's the reason why they decided to have a port at Norwich. And I picked 1814 as the year for those stats because on the 3rd of May, Alderman Crisp Brown of Norwich, he employed, the man he employed, William Cooper, a well-known national civil engineer, was a Norfolk man himself. Alderman Crisp Brown, this idea of a port was his baby, and he employed William Cooper to survey an alternative route from Norwich to the sea. We'll have a look at that alternative route in a minute. Alderman Crisp Brown was quite a flamboyant character. He'd been Sheriff of Norwich. He was mayor. He would later become the mayor. He was an alderman. He was a wealthy merchant, a maltster, an importer of coal. He was one of the wealthiest men in Norwich. And so he had a vested interest, financially, of course, of trying to find a way to get the imports to Norwich cheaper and quicker. And so he employed, on the 3rd of May, 1814, he employed William Cooper, the Norfolk engineer, to survey the whole of the River Yare and work out a way they could bypass the problems at Norwich. It took William Cooper 4 years to do this survey. And if we pass on to the next slide, four years later, on the 18th of September, I think it was, if my dates are right, the 8th of September, 1818, a meeting of the great and the good, the wealthy merchants and businessmen of Norwich met at the Guildhall. The meeting was called and organised by Crisp Brown. I don't know why he was Crisp, but I think it's probably a family surname that's been used as a surname. And here at the meeting, I've got the original, I've been through the original papers here. He delivered a presentation with his ideas of making Norwich a port. And he stated at one point, he talked about the important benefit of making Norwich a port as well as a city. And at that presentation, William, after a speech from Brown, which we won't go into because it's quite a long one, although he does say in his preamble he was only going to make a short speech, William Kubert came along and took the chair, and he presented his plans. Now, his plans at the time were not, as you can see from the original little drawing on the right hand side, the third one there, his plan had nothing to do with Lowestoft. He wanted to make a new cut to the south of Breydon Water to link up with the haven at Yarmouth, somewhere to the north of Galston. That's where he wanted to do it. And this is the drawing. This is one of the drawings that was produced in this little report. Well, it wasn't a little report, it was a long report from William Kubert. There is a note, in actual fact, on the report apologising for the fact that the printer couldn't print an exact outline of the river between Breydon Water and Norwich. So he did it as a straight line and just added the appropriate numbers to it. So it took 4 years to do this survey, and it went down well. Everybody could see the benefits for it. Probably the only people who couldn't see the benefits for it were Great Yarmouth, and we'll come on to that in a moment. So if we pass on to the next slide, please. And so it was decided at this meeting that they should set up a committee to investigate further the proposal and how to put into effect the proposal of making this of dredging the whole of the River Yare to make it deep enough to take seagoing vessels, how much it would cost, etc., etc. And those are the names of some of the people who formed the committee, and they are the great and good. There's John Patterson of Norwich. He was a wealthy wool merchant. He was 63 years old. He was a wool merchant, and he was later became one of the biggest brewers, formed the Pockthorpe Brewery, which would become Stewart and Patterson many years later. He'd been an MP for Norwich for 6 years, and he'd been the mayor of Norwich 1788. John Harvey, age 63, chairman of the Merchants and Manufacturers of Norwich, a mayor of Norwich in 1792. Edward Rigby of Norwich, age 68, local politician. He'd been mayor in 1805. He was a high-flying doctor and a writer. Thomas Back of Norwich, solicitor, a wine merchant, one of the biggest wine merchants in Norwich. He'd been mayor in 1809, and so it goes on. William Hanks, age 35, he was mayor of Norwich in 1816. Robert Hawkes, a wool and cotton merchant, also the owner of a paper mill, 34 years old. Joseph Geldart, age 42, a leading wine merchant, and Henry Richards of Norwich, a coal and corn merchant. So as you can see, they've got the big guns out to start organising this venture, a venture that would last a long while. So if we pass on to the next slide, I want to get through this first bit pretty quickly. So 2 years on, this plan to build a dike between the Yare to the south of the Breydon Water and the haven at Yarmouth came under for a tremendous amount of criticism from the Port and Haven authorities in Great Yarmouth and the burghers of Great Yarmouth. They did not want a private company running this. They wanted to do it themselves. So in the end, Kubert did another survey, and he came up with an alternative plan, which was to bypass Great Yarmouth altogether. And he worked out how they could build a harbour at Lowestoft and connect it by a dike to the Ear without going anywhere near Great Yarmouth. And this is his costing for the enterprise that he published in his second report. The first report was the one for Yarmouth. This is now the plan. Yarmouth has now been put on, not on the back boiler. Yarmouth is now out of the equation. Well, not quite, as you'll see. And excuse me, thank you. And Kubert worked out that it was going to cost £87,000 for this enterprise, which included a new lock at Mutford Bridge, a swing bridge at Haddiscoe, a new cut across the marshes, stop and floodgates at Lowestoft, a new cut from Lake Lothing to the sea, 400 yards long, etc., etc., etc. £87,000. And the committee thought this was a great idea, and so they took it on board. So we go on to the next slide now. So you might have seen this slide before. I used it in my Alton Broad talk. So this is a schematic map of, well, it's a modern map of the area. And there were 4 steps to be taken in this plan. Step 1 was to make a new bridge with lock gates at Mutford Lock in Alton Broad, Mutford Bridge. The idea being that if they didn't, when they made the cut through to the sea, this would change all the water levels on the rivers. Once they'd done that, they would then build, make the cut at Lowestoft and build a harbour. Lake Lothing being the harbour wasn't on the seaward side. Once that was done, they would then straighten and make a navigable dike to the west end of Alton Broad. And the 4th one was to make the cut from St Olave's to Reedham, a completely new dike. That was the plan. And that was going to cost, they estimated, £87,000. I'm sorry, excuse me, it's warm and dry in here tonight. So we push on and quickly see where this led to. So the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company was formed, an informal company at the time. They obviously had to, when they applied for an Act of Parliament, they actually had to prove that they could raise some of the capital to do this job. And here's a page showing the list of people who bought shares in the company. And here, just out of interest, is one of the share certificates for the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company. And they sold well, very, very well indeed. And the money was being raised quickly. They got the support of this man, Thomas Telford, the famous, he was the king of canals and waterways in this country. He built many, many, many of them. They got his opinion, and he sent a report which was fully in support of this thing. He said it would work, there would be no problems with it, and he gave it his support. And he certainly had, as an advisor, he had a hand in setting up the whole thing. So that's Thomas Telford. He's given his support to this plan. And so it's gradually moving on. We're now into October 1822. So we're 8 years after Chris Brown's original plan. And we're still waiting to see what will happen. This led to a war of words between the navigation company and the people of Great Yarmouth, who were totally opposed to it. Their opposition was such that basically, if they had a harbour at Lowestoft and a quicker, shorter route to Norwich, much of the trade and much of the income on the fees that ships had to pay in Yarmouth would diminish, and the town would Yarmouth would be the poorer for it. So these two pamphlets were published, 12th of December 1822 and the 14th of February 1823, in complete opposition to the plan. And a pamphlet war broke out. The 1820, the dates in red are pamphlets that are issued from Great Yarmouth. The dates against the plan, the dates in red, you'll see there's quite a lot of these. The dates in black, rather, that will come up in a moment, are the pamphlets of the people supporting things. So pamphlet war starts, and here we've got two of them. The one on the right in particular is quite a harsh one. Basically, it says it's a warning voice of the plan of making Norwich a port with a chart, blah, 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 and the practicalities of the scheme, which would lead to the total failure of the boosted advantages, etc., and the loss of property of landholders where the dike was going to be cut. And so this war of words broke out, and these pamphlets were printed in Norwich, and they were distributed in Beccles, Great Yarmouth, Lowestoft, and other market towns to try and raise public opinion against this thing. So we go to the next slide, please. So the next pamphlets were issued. There is a report listening to the entitled "The Voice of Truth." This was written by Henry Beverley Disney. He was, in fact, an ex-Royal Navy man, ex-merchant Navy, and for 15 years he'd lived in Lowestoft, and he was one of the leading Trinity pilots, and he was fully in support of the scheme. And he published this pamphlet in March 1823 in reply to the other ones, "The Voice of Truth," about making Norwich a port. And he went on and he said all of this propaganda, if you like, that Yarmouth had printed in the previous year was a load of bunkum, and this plan, in his opinion, knowing these waters off Lowestoft as a Trinity pilot for 15 years, he was in fact a Galston man, born in Galston, was a good idea. And it didn't take long before a long letter and a pamphlet was published on 7th of April that same year by Great Yarmouth, by this person who remains anonymous, attacking what he says in his Voice of Truth. And he says he's the author of the pamphlet, A Warning Voice, and he goes on again to tear into Disney's positiveness with loads of negatives. We could talk for ages about the whys and the wherefores in depth, and we won't go to that. Yarmouth basically was against it because they were very frightened of the loss of commerce if Lowestoft had a port leading through to Norwich and bypassing them. So these are the pamphlets that were published. We got some more to come up. If we can move to the next one. I want to get through this bit quite quickly, but I just want to paint the background of to what. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Stim. Again, in 1825, Captain George Nichols. Now, he was a marine surveyor in the Royal Navy. He was invited to come to Lowestoft and assess the practicalities of making a navigable communication for ships of burthen serve to the city of Norwich by the sea at Lowestoft. And he published this on the 30th of July 1825. Again, he attacked Great Yarmouth, saying Great Yarmouth, what they were saying wasn't true. The port of Lowestoft would work, the harbour at Lowestoft would work, the whole venture would work, and the Yarmouth men were basically talking a load of humbugs. This followed very quickly in August 1825 by another pamphlet that attacked the remarks made in the report by Captain George Nichols, and very cleverly it was aimed at the proprietors of land who had lands butting up against the river, and particularly where the new cut was going to be made between St Olaves and Reedham, saying that they would be danger of flooding on their lands, that the value of their lands would diminish, and so he tried to get the landowners on his side. And so if we move on, we do eventually get something happening. Yarmouth now decided that perhaps they could make their harbour more navigable. So they brought out the big guns. They brought out this man. He was James Walker, a Scotsman. He was one of the country's leading marine engineers, and he came to Great Yarmouth to assess how Great Yarmouth could be improved, how they could do something about the sandbar across the mouth. And here is his report about the state of the bar and haven and measurements to be taken for their improvement. This is on 27th of August 1825. And Yarmouth now came up with the idea, the one that the navigation company had mooted right back in 1818, of actually making a cut themselves south of Breydon Water to link up to the Yare, which would come under the Port and Haven of Great Yarmouth authorities and not a private company. So here's the plan drawn up by Walker, his report about the state of the entrance to the haven, and now his plan for a ship navigation instead of the one from Lowestoft to Norwich. This is 9th of January 1826. So we push on quickly to the next slide. In 1826, a bill is presented to Parliament for the building of the Norwich and Lowestoft navigation, and it's sent to a select committee for scrutiny, just as they do today for these things. And the committee first set on the 10th of May 1826. And it was a long, protracted scrutiny. It lasted from the 10th of April to the 1st of May 1826, and the printed minutes, of which I managed to find a copy online, ran to 246 pages. Here's the minutes of evidence, and on the right hand side you can see each day the witnesses for and against this project that were being called before the committee. Disney was there, Kubert was there, and Norwich seemed to have been a bit too blasé about this. There was lawyers appeared in support of Great Yarmouth. There they are at the top, Adams, Andrews and Turner. They had two people appearing to support the petition of the owners of the estates near the proposed navigation against the people. Andrews and Turner appeared as counsel in support of the petition of the mayor and burgesses of Great Yarmouth. So that's another petition. No person appeared on behalf of the petition for the navigation company, just three lawyers. So basically at the hearing, the navigation company was outgunned. Here is part of the report. This is a map of Lowestoft that you can see, and the original plan was not to cut a straight channel to the sea from Lake Lothing. Lake Lothing's the greeny blue area at the bottom, but one that would go up to the northeast and come out somewhere near the bottom of today's Battery Green Road, if you're familiar with the town. And it was also proposed to make a new road. I've marked that in red on there so it's clear, coming from the south end of the High Street, now the top of London Road North, and coming all the way down there. So this was the plan, and there's Mr. Cooper explaining it on the left. I'm not going to read it, and I don't expect you'll be able to read it, but I can assure you that Cooper got really, really torn into by the representatives of Great Yarmouth in a very negative way. So that was the original plan of 1826 that went to Parliament. So we move on to the next slide. We'll start building a harbour in a minute. So, as I said, it was 10th of May, 1826, that the committee, the scrutiny committee, threw out the bill. 1st of May, 1826, the committee hearings end, and the bill was rejected by 25 votes to 20. So they could not get the navigation company could not get parliamentary permission to build the harbour as they had planned it. And again, jumping on the back of this, Walker came along again with his plans at the invitation that is paid by the burghers of Great Yarmouth, the Port and Haven commissioners. And here you can see his map of his proposal to make a new cut from Gorleston. I shaded that in blue so you can see it there. Braden Water is above it, and you can see the plan was to make a new cut there. Nothing ever came of it, but this was a direct challenge to what was planned at Lowe in 26. James Walker, the engineer, made another report as to how, as well as building this new cut south of Braden Water, how he reckoned they could improve the state of the bar and the haven at Great Yarmouth. This all came to naught in the end. Again, that's a story in its own as to why the Yarmouth people eventually decided they didn't want this to happen. But so that's a plan in 1826 after the plan of the Norwich Lowestoft navigation companies has been thrown out by Parliament. So Yarmouth then looked closely at adopting this particular plan. So we move on, please. Again, Mr. Disney published another pamphlet in November 1826, and this again was in support of the building of the harbour at Lowestoft. This is when the new plan has been put forward, and again you can see there this particular new engineer had been called in, William Chapman. William Chapman was another nationally renowned marine engineer, and he was the improbability of the formation of a useful harbour at Lake Lothing. He's against it, and how it would be better to do one through Great Yarmouth from Norwich to Yarmouth to the sea. So this is his attack. Now this all comes about because, if we pass on to the next slide, please, this all comes about because the navigation company had revised their plans. William Cooper had revised their plans. They'd got a lot more support for the plan from the Norwich petitioners this time, and they submitted a new bill with a petition of support from Norwich. It was presented to Parliament in February 1827. 27th of February, it was read for a second time in the House of Commons, and as usual, it was passed to a committee for scrutiny. March the 7th, the committee concluded its hearing and passed the bill 25 votes in favour, 5 against. Okay, so it's now got the rubber stamp of the scrutiny, but it's now got to go back to the House of Commons, and the bill is returned to the House of Commons 11th of March 1827. 22nd of March, the bill is read for a third time, and it is passed and read that same evening in the House of Lords. It had to go to scrutiny, the House of Lords. It has got a tremendous amount of support. The Lord High Admiral of His Royal Highness, the Lord High Admiral, acknowledged his support. This was the Duke of Clarence, later to become George IV, and he supported it. And the bill is read for a second time in the House of Lords and passed to their committee. And the committee in the House of Lords concluded its evidence on the 7th of May, 1827. And on the 22nd of May, 1827, finally, and it must have been to the relief of the navigation company proprietors, the bill is read for a third time by the House of Lords and is passed. And 6 days later, it got the stamp of royal assent and it became law. The navigation company had finally got the Act of Parliament they wanted to enable them to turn Norwich into a port by building a harbour and at Lowestoft, and the new cut at Alton, and the new cut, the 3-mile new cut between St Olave's and Reedham. And the bill received royal assent. So we go on to the next slide, please. So here's a copy of the actual Act of Parliament that makes that. And it decreed that there should be 22 shareholders forming one body politic and cooperate by the name of the Company of Proprietors of the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation. This is now a formally legal constituted corporation and company. And here you can see, this is the little extract. I think it ran to about 47 pages, the actual Act of Parliament does. But here you can see it says, where am I? For the passage of such ships and other vessels from the said last mentioned lake, called Lake Lothing, to the sea at the said parish of Lowestoft in the county of Suffolk, and which said last mentioned cut is intended to pass through the said parish of Lowestoft in the said county, and the making and maintaining a port of or harbour on the seashore there in the said parishes of Colville, Kirkley, Lowestoft, or any one of them, with proper piers, jetties, breakwaters, basins, docks, locks, quays, wharfs, landing places, warehouses, and other works for the greater and more convenient use of the said rivers, New Cuts, New Haven. It goes on and on like that. And it will provide beneficial communication for vessels employed in the coasting and other trades, and for the conveyance of goods, wares, and merchandise to and from the said city of Norwich, and the county of the same city, and to and from divers parts of the said counties of Norfolk and Suffolk, and such port or harbour shall afford shelter to ships and vessels in stress of weather, and may be by the means of preserving the lives and property of many of His Majesty's subjects, and the said undertaking would generally be a great public utility. So there is the blessing of Parliament. Now they could get on with what needed to be done. Now we can start on a harbour. It's not bad. It's only 13 years since Chris Brown called the meeting with his idea in 1814 at Norwich. And we pass on to the next slide, please. Can we change slides, please, Stephen? Hello, we seem to have hit a glitch. No, I'm sorry about this, folks. We seem to have a problem. Have you got a problem there, Stephen? Hello? Oh, I do apologise. Are you there, Stephen? No, I'm sorry about this. We'll go. Oh, hello. We seem to have lost the presentation as well at the moment. I do apologise. Hopefully, this is only a temporary glitch, and we can get something back in a minute. Stephen seems to have disappeared altogether. He's no longer in shot whatsoever, except for me. So you've now got to look at me, and hopefully Stephen will come back very shortly. Unfortunately, where I'm sitting, I don't have any control over the presentation whatsoever. I'm totally dependent on the software and the expertise of Stephen to do that, and Paul, of course. It's a good time probably to go and put the kettle on. I'm just going to disappear from the screen for a moment. I'm sure you don't want to sit there and look at me without the presentation. I can't really continue this very well. Just going to disappear and see if I can contact Stephen by other means to see exactly what the problem is. I'll be back in a second. Go and put the kettle on. Yeah, was it the software crashed? Oh yeah, of course I will. Yeah, I thought the quickest thing to do would be to give you a call, then I'll go back online and tell them. Okay, I'll let you get on. No, it's all right. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. That's called technology. Hello, folks. I hope you're all still there. I've just spoken to Stephen on the phone. Apparently, the program that we're using has crashed. Stephen is now frantically uploading it again, so we should be able to continue very shortly, all being well. Stephen is ready, to put it crudely, working his butt off to try and get this going. So, as I said, apologies. Without the presentation, it's not really possible to continue the talk. I suppose we've done well. This is number 16 of the talks, and it's the first time we've actually hit a technical glitch. So I suppose it's some sort of sod's law that eventually something has gone to malfunction, given the complexities of the technology. I am sorry. Well, I can't hear you, Stephen. Yeah, I can't hear you. Ah, that's better. Still no sound.
So sorry, everyone.
Ah, there we go. I got you now. I've got everybody now. Hello, Paul and
Got the whole gang.
So I've got the whole caboodle back.
So sorry for that. So we were on the slide about the 220 shareholders forming that one political body.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I needed to move on from that one.
Okay, bear with me a second. I'll get it straight up. Thank you to everybody for letting us know that there was technical difficulties, and so sorry that it took so long to get it going again. But in the meantime.
Yeah, he's gone again. Ah, well done. Okay, so here we go. So the Act of Parliament has been passed. The burghers of Norwich are very, very happy. And here from the Bury and Norwich Post newspaper is the report of the great celebrations that took place in Norwich as soon as they heard the news that they were going to now go ahead with the project. All of the Chris Brown, the mayor, and everybody else returned from Norwich to great celebrations. They were received and congratulated. They were drawn along in triumph. They proceeded through the streets. The gentlemen who had been so zealous and indefatigably in gaining an object of such importance to the city were greeted by the waving of the handkerchief and colours from the windows of the houses. And they went down to the marketplace, and there at one of the inns, Chris Brown at the Angel Inn, he got up at the window and made a great speech to everybody. The bands played and everybody cheered. But as so often happens, there's always a downside to that. And we're told in the press report at night a large bonfire was made in the middle of the marketplace, which for the want of a few loads of faggots was supplied with spouts, watch boxes and the palings from neighbouring houses and gardens. Some of the ringleaders of the depredations made upon property were taken into custody by the police and conveyed to the clink. Their comrades, however, soon liberated them by pulling down the door, which they committed to the fire, nor would they suffer the firemen to extinguish the flames until after 1 o'clock in the morning. So what started off as a great celebration basically finished up in Norwich as a riot. But the point is they've got their Act of Parliament. So if we push on to the next slide, please. And the cost was high. Norwich spent £14,753 on legal fees and everything else. Great Yarmouth spent £8,090. You've got to multiply those figures by a figure of about 50, at least 50, probably even higher that, to get the idea in present day terms. 3rd of July 1827, the first meeting of the proprietors of the company is constituted under the Act of Parliament, takes place in Norwich. Colonel Robert J. Harvey, that's him on the right, becomes the president. Edward Newton is appointed a clerk. 2 treasurers appointed, and William Cubitt, the chief engineer. George Edwards of Carlton Colville, we met in my Alton Broad talk a few weeks ago, is appointed as the superintendent engineer to oversee the works at Lowestoft. Cubitt, of course, is overseeing all of the works. And there is a bit of a war hero, Lieutenant Colonel Harvey. Mutford Bridge on Tuesday, the 8th of September 1827. They didn't waste a lot of time. Work began on the new lock at Mutford Bridge. There was great celebrations there. Chris Brown, Colonel Harvey, and all the directors turned up. There was a huge concourse of people arrived. As I say, I covered this in my Alton Broad talk in some depth. Tens of thousands of people. If I get the right notes here, tens of thousands of people turned up, and about 3:30 in the afternoon, the masons and other artificers, upwards of 200s, having been marshalled by Messrs. Edwards and Telford, the assistant engineers, marched from the works, shouldering their respective working tools, and proceeded by flags and banners, and the band playing appropriate tunes. They went to the Queen's Head, where Colonel Harvey, the chairman, and many other directors of the company, and from there they travelled down to the Mutford Bridge, where there was a great party. Colonel Harvey was presented with a silver shovel to dig the first sod for the new bridge. He said that he thought it was more fitting that Chris Brown should do it, and so they cut the first sod on the bridge. And this is the report from the journal. And if we just click on for me once more, please, Stephen. And this is the picture of the celebrations, a scene of bustle and activity such as the oldest inhabitant had never witnessed. And there you can see in the background the old bridge at Mutford, linking Lake Lothing to the Broadwater, Alton Broad. And of course, this was going to be replaced by the necessary lock gates and a new bridge. And again, we'll push on quickly. I just want to get quickly through the Alton Broad bit. And here's an artist's impression of what the new bridge would look like. And it was finished on the 5th of November, 1828. And the new bridge and lock at Mutford Bridge was completed and officially opened. And so phase 1 of the plan of building the navigation from Lowestoft to Norwich was completed. And just again, out of interest, this is based on an original plan. This is the road through Alton Broad, the old bridge that you can see there, and hopefully, excuse me, if my slides are working correctly again. And I'm sure if you saw the Alton Broad talk, this will be looking familiar to you. And here is the finished construction of the new bridge and the locks at Mutford Lock. The locks, not the same ones, but there's still lock gates there today because they are an essential part of the navigation. So phase 1 is basically completed. So if we move on now, please, to the next slide. So as we said earlier, there's a sandbar about 400 yards wide between the sea at Lowestoft. This is the scene looking south from Lowestoft. You can see in the background there, you can see the cliffs at Kirkley and Pakefield and beyond. Just on the horizon, on the skyline, you can see Kirkley St. Peter's Church. So this is the sandbar that they had to eventually cut through, but it was no easy task. So if we look at the next slide, which I hope should be a map, this is Hodgkinson's map of Suffolk, 1783, and there's Lake Lothing at the top, top left, and you can see if it's working there. This is the track, the sandbar, and the line at which the new cut would be made. The lands that we're going through, we'll see from the next slide when it comes up, and it should pop up any moment. Here we are. Again, this is an original plan. This is the eastern end of Lake Lothing. I've coloured that in blue a little bit so you can make it out. You can see the Turnpike Road, and all of the land around there is said to be owned by the Lowestoft trustees. These are the lamp lands, so-called lamp lands. They were leased to people, and the income was used to improve the lighting and the repair of the streets in Lowestoft. And these lands had to be, some of these had to be purchased by the navigation company. So we push on to the next slide again. I'm going through this rather rapidly. I hope you'll follow me. This is my interpretation based on the original map. Here are the lamp lands. The brown areas are the lamp lands. You can see the dotted red line. That's the border between Lowestoft and Kirkley. The green area is the old common land, the Deans. So this is the area where the cut had to be made. But of course, first of all, they had to purchase the land from the trustees of the lamp lands. The navigation company did. They couldn't just go blazing in and cut through other people's property. And so they had to purchase the necessary parts of the lamp lands. The common land wasn't a problem so much. All they had to do was get the permission of the Lord of the Manor, who had ownership of the common lands or oversight of the common lands, to do that. Whether they paid anything or not, there's no record of. So I'm assuming that they didn't. So these are the this is the spot where the cut will be made. And we'll push on again to the next slide. I'm going through this a little bit faster than I intended, but still a fair bit of ground to cover. Here's a copy of an original plan. This is a section. I don't know how well you can see it through the area. So the high pointy bit, 2/3 of the way to the right of the map, that represents the sandbar. There's the sea to the right. There's Lake Lothing, and then towards the edge of the picture is Mutford Bridge, where the little spike sits up. And you can see the dotted line under Lake Lothing is the depth at which the bed of Lake Lothing and the cut had to be excavated to achieve their aims, their goals. So this is one of a copy of one of the original plans. There is another one that we can see now. If you can change for me, please, Stephen. So here is a view, Lake Lothing on the left, and the sea, there we are, I've coloured them in for you, the sea on the right, and you can see the intended cut is marked where it's marked where the intended cut is going to go. It's a far cry from the first plan where the cut was meant to go out. If you look at the tip of Lake Lothing, the eastern end of Lake Lothing, it would have gone up at a 45-degree angle from there towards the northeast. So this is the second plan, and 5th of August 1828, an agreement between the trustees of the lamp lands was entered into, and on the 12th of November, the necessary land was conveyed under that agreement of 15th of August, 15 acres, and well, it's just slightly marginally more than 15 acres was conveyed to the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company. I haven't been able to establish exactly how much they had to pay for it. Sorry about that. That's Windows playing up, giving me messages. And here's an advert that appeared at this time. This is December 1828, inviting builders to come down to Lowestoft to erect all the necessary works, buildings, engine sheds, boiler houses, etc., etc., and also inviting carpenters to come and erect 1,500 feet, more or less, of stake posts and palings, fencing 9 feet high to surround the great area where they were going to make the cut. And the people were invited to apply for that work. So we come on a little bit more to what's going on. If we change slides, please. And so as soon as the sale had gone forward, work started on the excavation for the Great Sea Lock at Lowestoft. I'll say a little bit more about the Great Sea Lock in a moment. We don't know how many navvies came to Lowestoft, had to dig this. This is not Lowestoft in the picture, but there must have been a few hundred of them. And we also know that Kubert told the scrutiny committee when asked how they were going to get the soil out of the great cut they were going to make, he said they were going to use a barrow run. And here you can see a photograph of navvies using a barrow run to get the soil from the base of the deep cut. So here's the intended cut. The first part of the cut had to be in the middle. You couldn't cut it in one straight line, all in one go, because they had to put the locks in there. The locks had were a sluice lock, and so they had to make a cut there in the middle. So they left a piece of the land to the west between the end of the first cut and Lake Lothing, and a piece to the east between the intended cut, the first part of the intended cut, and the sea. So that's where they would build what became known as the Great Sea Lock. The purpose of the sea lock I'll talk about in a moment, and I've marked in red, as you can see from that area that I've shaded where the first cut is going to be made. It cut through the Turnpike Road, so they had to put a new bypass, if you like, round the cut to compensate for the fact the Turnpike Road had been cut down in half. So there was a temporary diversion there while the work was carried on. It must have been one hell of a sight. A 9-foot-high fence was erected all the way around it as well, according to the advert that we just saw. So it must have been one heck of a sight to see these navvies all working with picks and shovels, gradually digging this huge hole in the sandbar. And so we move on to the next slide again, please. Now, Lake Lothing had to be dredged. It had to be a lot deeper, if that cross section that we saw there. And so the proprietors had a bucket dredger called Excavator, or the Excavator. It was actually built on Lake Lothing by Messrs. James Bailey of Ipswich, and it was launched on the 18th of December 1828. There's a newspaper cutting there from December, I'm trying to see the 20th, describing this excavator. what its job was. And we're told that it could dredge up to 2,500 tons of silt and gravel from the bottom of Lake Lothing every week. And this, interestingly enough, was shipped to Mutford Bridge and helped to build up and strengthen the embankment there, each side of the new lock gates that have been built. So they're recycling the stuff that comes from the bottom of Lake Lothing to reinforce the embankment at Mutford Bridge. This is no mean feat that they've taken on. I love the, I don't know how well you can see the photograph. I love the excavator, the bucket excavator, bucket dredger. In actual fact, there seems to be halfway along the hull what looks like a sash window. But anyway, this was state-of-the-art technology at the time, not sash windows, I mean, this dredger. And it was built specifically to work on the navigation. It would be used when they needed to dredger, when they needed to keep the cut clear after everything is finished. This was used for many, many years to come. So this is Excavator, or the Excavator, as the newspaper report called it. Now, if we go on to the next slide, you see there is another problem. They're excavating 2,500 tons of silt and stuff from the bottom of Lake Lothing, but they got to get it to Mutford Bridge to reinforce the embankment. And so here you can see this is an advert again. It's an advert for anybody who had got a wherry or a barge of some sort to tender to help. So they would tender to cart the stuff dredged up by excavator. They would cart it up Lake Lothing to Mutford Bridge to reinforce the embankment. So they got the means, the company had the means to dredge the thing, but they didn't have enough vessels of their own to move the silt up to Mutford Bridge. And so they actually put tenders out for men with wherries and other small craft who would move the silts for them. And so if we can go quickly through what's happening here then, on the 8th of September, is it possible just to take that back for me again, Stu? Yeah, on the 8th of September 1829, part of the cut is completed and the first stone of the sea lock is laid. Unfortunately, 13-14 December 1829, there was an exceptional high tide and it flowed over the turnpike road and into the navigation works. Severe cold weather halted work on the cut for a while. 25th of February 1830, the swing bridge arrived at Lowestoft by river. Ironically, the parts of it came by river via Great Yarmouth, hadn't been delayed for a long time by ice in the river between Somerleyton and the Lake Lothing. 1st of April 1830, the heel posts of the sea lock gates arrive at Lowestoft, and the 2nd of June 1830, the new bridge is finally complete and is open to the public. And so the temporary bypass around the works is now no longer needed, and you can now go down the turnpike road and cross on this wonderful new swing bridge that has been erected. So if you can push on again now, please, Stephen. And here is Lowestoft's first swing bridge. It was a double-leaf swing bridge. It was built by John Seward and Co. of the Canal Ironworks, Limehouse in London. Cast iron, 102 feet long, weight 240 tons, opening arch 52 feet. It was such a work of ingenuity and art that it is opened with the greatest of ease by one man on either side, turning, even with one hand, a crank which gives movement to the pivots contained in two large boxes. And when it is closed, the joining is scarcely perceptible. That's a wonderful feat of engineering. And here is a photograph taken much later. It's a detail of a photograph taken much later. and you can still see this is the original bridge. If you look carefully down into the bottom, very bottom left-hand corner, you can actually see the pivots of one of the lock gates. Again, I'll come on to the purpose of the lock gates in a while. But the time this photograph was taken, the lock gates were no longer being used. This would date somewhere, I should think, from the 1870s, this particular photograph. So as you can see, it was a great undertaking. Something else it did as well, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So we push on to the next slide. Just make sure I got the right one here. So here's the press report of the opening of the Norwich and Lowestoft navigation on the 13th of June 1830, and it was in fact a great feat indeed. The description is all in here. Everybody, the great and the good, came down from Norwich. The local people came in their droves to walk over the new bridge. There was a band playing, and it was a great day for all. And it marked really another step towards the completion of the project. Again, I putting the press cuttings up basically to show how much coverage this was actually getting in the Norfolk newspapers. It got a lot of column inches, the whole story did. There's no local newspaper at Lowestoft at the time, so that's why I'm having to go through to the Norfolk Chronicle. So we'll push on again to the next slide. The next stage, the bridge is in place. The Great Sea Lock has been built. And so the next stage is now to connect the sea lock to Lake Lothing. As you can see, I hope in this picture in a second, the cut is going to be extended now westwards to Lake Lothing. The water from Lake Lothing can't get into the sea lock at the moment because the lock gates are kept closed. So the sea lock is still dry, but the water now can flow up to the gates, and when the gates are eventually opened, the water can flow into the sea lock. So basically, this is a test to make certain that the sea lock, everything, gates work correctly. So work now continues on this part of the cut. It's a long job. It must have been a cold and wet job. They were working through right through the winter on this project. I don't know how much Navy's got paid, but I think they definitely earned their money. So we go to the next slide, please. Because the inner harbour was going to become a place where ships in trouble could go if they needed help. There was also built on the northern side of Lake Lothing a patent slip, one of the latest slips to drag boats up the slipway out of the water for repairs. So on the 6th of October 1830, work commenced on Peto's patent slip. So here you can see on this picture here, the 31st of March 1831, water from Lake Lothing was finally emitted into the sea lock and the half-finished cut. So now you can see the bridge is there, the sea lock has been built, and the cut has been extended through into Lake Lothing. And the lock gates on that date were tested satisfactorily. And here from the Norwich, Bury Norwich Post, this time 1831, the actual testing of the sea lock is reported. And the lock filled up from the waters of Lake Lothing at a rate of 1 foot in 5 minutes. and by 4:30 in the afternoon, the water therein had risen to the level of the lake, which was 10 feet. The Great Sea Lock itself, which was essential to this, I'll explain in a second why. Here we've got the statistics for it, if you like statistics. It was built by Messrs. Wright and Cattermole of Norwich. The length of sluice gates 400 feet, the width between the walls 50 feet, so it's 50 feet wide. It was 27 feet deep. Below that, there was 9 to 10 feet of concrete or stone at the bottom. The thickness of the side walls at the bottom were 8 to 10 feet thick. The thickness of the side wall at the top was 4 feet. The lock chamber was 150 feet long. The breadth of each lock gate was 30 feet. The height of each lock gate was 25 feet. The weight of each lock gate was 20 tons. And it was estimated the quantity of bricks used was between 5 and 6 million. All of those bricks had to be made for the purpose. The quantity of stone used was about 20,000 cubic feet. That's one hell of an undertaking. And the newspaper reported in this report, this work is not only singular in its construction, but is probably the largest of its kind in existence. I'm not quite sure how true that was. I'm no expert on sea locks at the time. The idea of the sea lock, eventually, I'll come on to that in a moment once we finish the cut, because we've still got one more thing to do here, which we've got to now extend the cut to the sea to let the water from the North Sea into Lake Lothing. So if we pass on to the next slide, please. So on the 14th of April 1831, work on the remaining eastward part of the cut commenced. And so they slowly cut through the rest of it, and eventually the cut was made into joining Lake Lothing and the sea. However, the sea, they made certain that the lock gates and the sea lock were shut when the cut was complete and the water flowed in. So the water, the salt water couldn't get into the lock gates and then through until the lock gates were open. So here's the sea lock, and eventually, I hope, if I got this working right, and here's the finished product. So now you've got the entrance to the new harbour. Remember, the harbour is Lake Lothing. I was going to say Loch Ness for some reason. Oh. And there's the sea lock. Now, the idea of the sea lock was this. There was danger of silting up of the new entrance to the harbour. The silts flow down here. There was, I'll come on to that in a moment. We'll come on to this. On the 15th of June 1831, they actually opened the lock gates and allowed the seawater to flow in. And there's this wonderful description from the Bury and Norwich Post of a much longer article, and it says some circumstances attending the junction of the salt and fresh waters in the first instance are remarkable. The salt water entered the lake with a strong undercurrent, the fresh water running out at the same time to the sea upon the surface. The fresh water was raised to the eruption of the salt water beneath, and an immense quantity of yeast-like scum rose to the surface of the lake. The entire body of water in Lake Lothing was elevated above its former level. There was a perceptible and clearly defined line where the salt and the fresh water met, the former rushing under the latter. Lake Lothing was thickly studded with the bodies of pike, carp, perch, bream, roach and dace, multitudes of which were carried into the ocean and thrown afterwards upon the beach. A pike of about 20 pounds weight was taken up dead at Mutford end of the lake, and on opening its stomach, a herring was found in its entirety. The waters of Lake Lothing exhibited phosphorescent light peculiar to seawater on the second or third night after the opening. So that's the great effect of the sea coming in. It must have been stupendous to see. And the first vessels on that day sailed through the lock and entered the harbour. It was a 50-ton vessel, the Bounty of Goole. Later, she was followed by 2 pilot cutters, the Sunflower and the Good Intent. And that evening, there arrived a much larger vessel, the brig Ulysses. So now we've got stage 2 of the project. I just go back to what I was saying about the purpose of the sea locks. With the well, we can pass on to the next slide while I'm talking. Again, I'll leave the sea locks to one side while we get this into sync. So Alton Dyke was phase 3 of this exercise, which was to make the dyke navigable through to the River Waveney. Here's a map. Again, you might be familiar with this map from the Alton Broad talk. Here's the map of the western end of Alton Broad, and you can see the curly dyke, the original old dyke. That wasn't enough to take seagoing ships, so a new dyke had to be cut, and this new dyke was much wider and straighter, and it would give access, an easy access. And there you can see I've superimposed on that the path and the width of the new dyke. So now we've got the third part complete. The work started on this in June, 16th June 1831. I'm not quite certain when it was completed. I can't find any record of that, but obviously it was, because if we go on to the next slide, please. There it is today. This is the new cut, as it was called in 1831 when it was made. I don't know if many people have sailed up that today. I think it's undergone quite a lot of changes since it was cut in 1831. Now, on the 11th of August 1831, the new harbour was officially opened at Lowestoft, and here is the report of that. Again, I'll just read a little bit from the start. The public opening of the new harbour at Lowestoft took place on Wednesday last. That's the 11th of August 1831. About 10 o'clock, the Lowestoft steam packet arrived off the harbour from Yarmouth, decked in gallant trim for the occasion. The directors of the company, many of the proprietors and their friends, went on board the Lowestoft, which proceeded to take in tow the Orion of London, and had arrived that morning. They entered the harbour later in the morning, accompanied by 2 bands and the playing music and the firing of guns. There was a great procession through the town. Thousands of people turned up for it. All the directors, everybody else were here. It was a great feast day in the town. They later went up to the Queen's Head Hotel, and the meal presided over by Lieutenant Colonel Harvey. Speeches were made, and everybody was really happy that this event was now complete, but not quite, because they still had to get the new cut made from St Olave's to Reedham. But the first 3 phases are done, and Lowestoft now has a fully functioning harbour. So if we go on to the next phase, please. So here is the completed harbour from a contemporary map, the entrance really with the locks, and the pink area that I've highlighted there, that's the area of land surrounding the harbour and the entrance to Lake Lothing that was now owned by the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company. So they actually now own that land. And here's one of the first pictures, 1833, this sketch that's made looking from Lake Lothing and you can see the new bridge in the background. You can see on the right the two windmills in Kirkley, and you can see it's still quite Lake Lothing is still basically a lake, but now with a modern entrance. It would be years before all the quays and wharves and docks would be built. And on this map here, you can see this is a contemporary map, 1832. I hope you can see it clearly. You can see the scoring sluice is marked, the navigation house, which is still there today in actual fact. The slipway, Morton's Patent Slip, can be seen on the north shore of Lake Lothing, and there is the entrance to the new harbour. At this time, it hadn't actually got any piers or anything. It was just basically a cut through to the sluice, to the lock. While I'm on this screen, I'll just go a little bit back, backtrack a little bit. The idea of the Great Lock and the sluice gates was, as I said, there's a tendency for silting up along this coast, and the idea was that at low tide, the lock gates. I always get this the wrong way around. Right. At low tide, the lock gates would be open, and so as the tide rose, it would rise in Lake Lothing and also obviously in the harbour entrance. At high tide, the lock gates would be closed, and then over the next 10 hours or so, the tide would go down, and at low tide, the water in Lake Lothing would be between 10 and 12 feet higher than the water of the North Sea. At that point, the lock gates and sluices would be opened, and the idea was that the great rush of water from Lake Lothing down through the harbour mouth into the sea would actually wash away all of the silts that might have been building up. And then, of course, that's low tide, so you leave the gates open until the next high tide, you shut them again, so on and so forth. Because the sluices operated separately to the, you could in actual fact open the lock gates without letting the water of Lake Lothing out. It's a very, very simple but ingenious method of keeping the silts and stopping the silting up of the harbour. So we push on to the next slide because we've got a way to go as yet. I hope you're all still with me. Yep. On the 17th of January 1832, another Act of Parliament was passed enabling the company to extend the time needed for the completion of the work, notably in making the new cut from St Olave's to Reedham. 1832, tenders were invited to build the new cut from Reedham to Haddiscoe. I've got that wrong, haven't I? Connecting the Waveney and the Year. The directors accepted the tender of Thomas Townsend of Birmingham to make the cut and complete it by December the 1st that same year at a cost of £40,000. By August 1832, the piling of the north and south outer piers of Lowestoft Harbour had been complete. The new cut is finally completed on the 29th of January 1833. The first vessels to sail through the new cut, but it wasn't until the 10th of September 1833 the 32-mile Norwich to Lowestoft navigation was opened. However, and this is another story, the opening ceremonies did not pass without a hitch. Basically, there was a squabble between two boats as they entered the new cut to take them through to Reedham, and there was an altercation. The two boats collided. The teenage son of the captain of one of the boats was thrown overboard. He cracked his head on the side of the ship and was actually drowned during the opening ceremony. And I don't know whether this augured what was to come later, but it wasn't a very, very auspicious start to the opening of the navigation. However, Lowestoft did have its harbour, and unfortunately for us today, its bridge. So we pass on, please. We got a little bit more time before we go on. So we got to look, and we go to the next slide. So it was then intended to build a big port at Norwich, but for reasons we'll see shortly, this never happened. It was to become known as Clarence Harbour, and it was to link directly with Griffin's Wharf in London, Toady Street, London. This is where the goods to Norwich would come via Lowestoft from Griffin's Wharf. It was to be called Clarence Harbour in honour of Prince Henry William, who was Duke of Clarence. From 1830, he was Duke of Clarence at the time this Act of Parliament went through. They decided to name it after him for his support, and it became known, was going to be called Clarence Harbour. That's the port that was going to be at Norwich, but that never got off the ground really. So as I said, he became George IV in 1830, and the cost. By 1831, the whole enterprise had cost £90,000, but the company had run out of money because they'd budgeted for £100,000, if you remember the original thing. Another £49,250 was needed to complete the scheme. The government loan commissioners set up to support private enterprise loaned the company £50,000 at interest. In 1833, stormy weather and high tides damaged the bridge at Lowestoft, washing away thousands of tons of earth from behind the pilings of the sea lock, and the sea broke into the inner harbour. In 1834, the cheap wooden lock gates at Lowestoft are suffering from shipworm, and in consequence, the harbour was silting up. The gates couldn't operate. The company applied for a further loan of £30,000, what was refused. December 1834, the loan commissioners foreclosed on all of the loans, and the company was declared bankrupt in 1834, and the the whole navigation was put on to the open market to be sold. It was eventually sold. It wasn't sold until 1842. I've got the notes here. I don't know how well you can see what I put on there. The company owed the government loan commissioners £54,000. They managed to get back £7,500 by selling off a lot of the assets. They got another £4,935, and that's all the money they could get back from the bankrupt company. The government loan commissioners, the country, in actual fact, incurred a loss of £43,279, 3 shillings and 8pence. That's how much money they lost. They sold the undertaking to a consortium of Lowestoft businessmen for £12,500, but the consortium of Lowestoft businessmen, because of the deterioration of the lock gates in particular and the silting up of the harbour, they couldn't do anything with it at all, and it became a bit of a white elephant. So we now push on to the next slide. It became a white elephant until 1844. Samuel Morton Peto, he purchased the whole setup for £12,500 in 1844. And that was him and his company, the Norfolk Railway Company, that in actual fact extended and made the whole thing work. In 1840 through to 1845 to 1850, the harbour at Lowestoft was improved. The navigation company, but as I say on there, that's another story. The P2's work and the Norfolk Railway Company's work is a completely different story. Dear old Alderman Crisp, what happened to him? On the 4th of November 1829, he was declared to be bankrupt and bust. And all his assets were seized. He died on the 9th of August 1830. He never saw the navigation complete, sad to say. He died on board HMS Lyra. And this is a little obituary that I found. He died on the 19th of August 1830 on board HMS Lyra. Chris Brown of Esquire, the celebrated agriculturalist, alderman of the city of Norwich, on board which vessel he took a voyage at the instigation of his medical advisors and dearest connections in the hope of recovering from the extreme depression of spirits attendant to his late reverse of fortune. So he basically broke down after he was declared bankrupt. His doctor presumably had recommended he go to sea and get away from everything, but on that voyage he died. Unfortunately, we don't know what he died of because that's before it was compulsory to have death certificates issued, so we'll never know what it was. Perhaps he died of a broken heart. There's a memorial tablet to him in the obsolete church of St. Ethelred's in Norwich, and here is his memorial tablet. So that's poor old Chris Brown, who never saw his dream come true, despite the fact that he spent from 1840 basically through almost to his death, 1814 almost basically through to his death, fighting to have this navigation built. So that's a little sort of sad end to the story, that bit. One other slide, two more slides to come up, and then that's it. So interestingly enough, although the Clarence Harbour was never built in Norwich because the company had gone bust and been foreclosed on, so that end of them, they had already erected for the workmen a public house in 1837 for the refreshment of the workmen, and the public house was called Clarence Harbour, and that pub opened in 1837, erstwhile to serve the men working to build Clarence Harbour, which never happened, and that in actual fact was knocked down in 2004, and a small cul-de-sac called Clarence Harbour stands on the site. You remember all those millions of bricks that we were told were used to build the Great Lock? This is all that's left of them. This is on the just on the north side of Lake Lothing. You can see it as you cross the bridge to the west. It's not far from the I've forgotten the name of the house there. Where are we? I got just get the date there. I'm getting dreadful on dates as an age thing. 1981. Basically, the last remains of the old sea lock were removed when the cut here was widened and deepened. But some of the old bricks still existed, and these were obviously taken up, and they were made into this memorial to the building of the first harbour, and these were actually unveiled by our late MP, the Right Honourable James Pryor. This was on the 20th of March 1981 at the inauguration of this new deep water channel, and this is all that remains of the harbour, Great Sea Lock, and the hopes and dreams of the Norwich and Lowestoft Navigation Company all those years ago. And that is in actual fact my last slide. There's only one more thing to do. If you could just click me one more time, Stephen. That's just to say that this talk was possible thanks to the Suffolk Record Office way back in the day when I worked there, who enabled me to use some of their material, and also, of course, to my colleagues in the Port of Lowestoft Research Society and their archives. And that, despite a technical hitch in the middle, I hope it didn't spoil the talk too much for you, my friends. That actually concludes this evening's talk. And if we'd have been talking about witchcraft, I would have blamed witchcraft on the technical fault. But I can't do that tonight, unless it's Chris Brown's goose looking over my shoulder. Anyway, thanks for turning up. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Ivan. How are you? Thank you. For,
okay.
I think we could still blame witchcraft, and I mean, it would save me getting the blame. Let's put it that way.
That's the thought. We stirred up something, I think, when we actually mentioned the Witchfinder General and witches tonight. I'm sure.
As we approach the witching hour, they'll be out for our. Well, they'll be out for my blood, Ivan, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a couple of things I found absolutely fascinating about that. One was the 220-ton bridge that could be moved by one hand. That's incredible. What a feat of workmanship and engineering.
Yeah. I think the whole enterprise was a real engineering feat.
Absolutely,
because we're sort of in the fairly early days of the Industrial Revolution as well, aren't we? It's not peaking yet. No,
that's true. Yeah, and the other thing was, just the incredible influx of navvies in the area, and I mean, just to lay 5 or 6 million bricks. That's a massive amount of skills and labour. Absolutely incredible. I wonder where I often think of the amount of history that is stored like energy in a brick. So you might pass over a threshold and see the way it's worn under shoed feet and things like that. And it's those things that really sort of stand out for me in history. And I wonder how many of those 5 or 6 million bricks went on to be reclaimed and used in another project or another building. It fascinates me. It really does tickle me. And the final thing that I found interesting was, as you said, poor old Alderman Crisp Brown. I wonder if it was just being poor that killed him. We all know that the poor die a lot earlier than the rest of their rich peers.
Well, he went very quickly then. I mean, he was declared bankrupt, I think it was November 1829, and he died a year later.
Yeah, no, he did, yeah.
And
that's a very sad thing.
Because he didn't have any more money to live the way he used to.
Yeah, so he might as well just die and get it over with. Yeah. We've got some comments in, obviously. One's from Linda Boyce. She says, "Thank you, Ivan," and thank you, Linda, and everyone else for your patience while we got that technical hitch out of the way. So sorry for that. We have one from Steve Fingleton. Great talk. Thanks, Ivan. Look forward to Saturday evening. Oh, I imagine Steve's going to be joining you at the Seagull Theatre for the Heritage Day.
That's right. That's the next one. And I've also, in actual fact, in November, been invited to do some talks for the Suffolk Family History Society online as well.
Good. Well, that'd be fantastic.
They're in their infancy at the moment.
Sure, but you can maybe fill us in a fortnight or sometime after that. And for anybody that's interested, Ivan will keep us updated. Somebody I'm sure will be interested is my old friend James Wright. He says, "Thanks for another informative talk."
You're welcome, James.
He's a lovely guy, James. Chris Collins says, "The things and their history that we pass every day without knowing a thing about them. So interesting, and love learning new facts." Thank you, Ivan. You certainly did well tonight. Andrew Wise, he says, "Thanks, I learned skit tonight," but he actually, Andrew, we know what you meant. He amended that by saying, "I learned a lot tonight." Well, thank you for tuning in, Andrew. Very, You're very kind to do so. Jackie Draper says, "Thanks for this evening. Great, interesting talk." And it was. And as I said before we kicked off, it's the politics of it that fascinate me, Ivan. I've already said the engineering part of it is undoubtedly you can't get away from just the feat of engineering that is, as you mentioned. But yeah, I love the politics and all the dirty, grimy backdoor stuff. And you mentioned about not being able to find whether or not money had been handed over for the transferal of ownership of the common land to the who was it? Was it the mayor of Lowestoft that oversaw that?
No, the Lord of the Manor.
Lord of the Manor. That's it. Sorry,
I think it would have been at that time. It was the Lord of the Manor. I think the Lord of the Manor at that time. I think the manorial title, I think it was in the hands of trustees. It wasn't until Summer Leighton Hall was purchased by Peter in 1844 that with it went the manorial rights of Lowestoft and other. I'm pretty certain I'm right on that. Off the top of my head. Our brain is beginning to wind down now.
That's all right. But yeah, like I said, I find it just interesting, and I bet some money crossed hands, even though it wasn't officially recorded. I bet somebody profited from it.
Oh, I'm sure there was backhanders everywhere going around. I just wondering how much the navigation company slipped to Mr. Disney, the Trinity pilot, to publish his thoughts. And perhaps he didn't. Perhaps we're being churlish, and perhaps he did it because he truly believed in. But I think there's a slight irony there as well that in the long run, one of the Yarmouth's the Trinity pilots of Great Yarmouth, who, when they objected in their publications, and the engineers at Great Yarmouth, they did say that they didn't think this would work because the harbour mouth would sill up.
Yeah,
Cubitt was convinced that his locks and sluices would do the trick, but nobody asked the question, what would happen if the lock gates failed, which they did, because apparently he must have used cheaper wood because it got teredo worm, I think it was called, that started to eat the lock gates and they didn't function anymore. And so because of that, the harbour started to sill up. And that's exactly what the people of Yarmouth, or the people who know these things on Yarmouth side, predicted would probably happen. Not the gates would fail, but at some point the harbour would sill up. That's why when Peto took over the harbour, well, it wasn't Peto, it was the Norfolk Railway Company. That's why they had such long piers out. But what are they, like 1,400 feet long, the South Pier, and what used to be the North Pier. The idea being so far out that the silts would actually build up against the North Pier and they wouldn't sweep round into the harbour mouth. But even then, with the new pier, at times the hello, my phone's at times even the harbour mouth at Lowestoft silted up.
Well, I'm just going to mention one more comment from Bill Robertson. Thanks, Ivan. Brilliant as usual, he says. And I'm just going to remind everybody that we have another talk, another history session with Ivan Bunn in 2 weeks. It'll be episode number 17. And it is based on the witch finders in Suffolk. So Matthew Hopkins and his assistants looking for witches in Suffolk. That's what Ivan will be chatting to us about in 2 weeks' time, which will be episode 17. And that's a good moment actually to mention the kind of books that you can buy. They're really rather fantastic books, and I've even got some pictures. Let me see. Yeah, we've got this one, which is A Trial of Witches by Gilbert Guise and Ivan Bunn. We've got this one, which is called George Borrow, Alton and Beyond, which is by Ivan Bunn. And we've got Haunted Lowestoft, A Return to Haunted Lowestoft by Ivan Bunn and Henry Baker, this featuring Where Witches Once Walked. And finally, you can get your copy of The Trial of Lowestoft Witches, a facsimile of the original report of the trial of Amy Denny and Rose Callender in 1662, a foreword by Ivan Bunn, edited by Henry Baker. And those books are available in your local Waterstones, or you could even try approaching your local independent bookshop to see if they could order them in for you, and if you prefer. And before we leave, I must just give due mention to our funders. They are the People's Health Trust, and we're very grateful to have their support throughout this pandemic, or epidemic as it is, and it's enabled us to not just start but to continue with the Lowestoft history sessions. This is number 16, and we also are able to do our Tuesday night broadcast based on the shanties and the context historically of shanties and the heritage of the music and of the folk of this stretch of our lovely coastline. And we'll be here, Stephen and I, on Tuesday night, tomorrow night, from 7:30 p.m. to sing you some of those shanties and talk about how they came about and all kinds of context. But for now, I'm going to say good night to all of you, and good night to Ivan, and say thank you very much, mate, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, cheers. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody who's been watching tonight. See you again in a fortnight. Have a good time if you can.